anti-Semitic, basically. He drove all the Jews that could see it coming out of Germany, and among them were some great scientists. And Leo Szilard, who was, I think, obviously from Hungary originally, but somehow he got driven out. Einstein got driven out. And Leo Szilard lands eventually in the United States. And he writes a letter to tell the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, that there's a bunch of uranium moving different ways or whatever it may be. I don't know anything about physics, zero. I don't know what the off and on sign is. But in any event, I know what the letter did, because he writes a letter and says, something big may happen in physics, and America better get to it first. But then he has the problem of, how do I get it to Roosevelt? Leo Szilard, who's he, the President of the United States? So he figures if he gets Einstein to co-sign it, that the President will pay attention, and he's right. So he goes and gets Einstein, and the two of them send the letter, and they send it to Roosevelt, and they wouldn't necessarily have been in the United States if it, Hitler had a different, hadn't had the crazy views about Jews, basically. And so anyway, that letter went, and we developed the atom bomb before anybody else did. It was a very, very fortunate development that Leo Szilard and Einstein happened to end up in the United States rather than perhaps be someplace else. Who knows? But the accidents of history, and there's going to be more accidents in connection with atomic weapons. We've come close for various times. I mean, we had geese flying over, somewhere up north, and NORAD gets a crazy signal, and we've had wrong training tapes placed. One time, we're in the Soviet Union or some, it looks like things are going on, and we can't do anything about it. And that is one risk that Berkshire absolutely has no interest in, even though you can say everybody in the world should have an interest, but it doesn't do us any good. The feeling doesn't do us any good to think about it. But that doesn't stop the fact that there are two powers in the world that, through miscalculation of the other's intentions, through all kinds of things, have come close in the past. And Charlie and I lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we knew there was some chance that weapons of mass destruction would be used. And believe me, there's a lot more bad that can happen. And humanity has not really come up with a counterforce to technology. I mean, if you live back in the caveman ages, if you were a sociopath or something, you threw a rock at the guy in the next cave, or something. I mean, it was sort of proportional to, and we kept developing, and then there was this breakthrough where technology has totally outrun humanity, and we'll see what happens, but so far so good. And Berkshire does not have an answer, though. There's certain things we don't write policies on because we wouldn't be able to make good on them anyway, if it happened. And everybody would know we wouldn't be able to make good on them. So you have that risk, and there's nothing Berkshire can protect you against. And we've been very lucky so far. Ajit, do you ever get any questions in terms of?
In addition to all what Warren has said in terms of the chance of something like this happening, The additional thing that concerns me about a nuclear situation is my lack of ability to really estimate what our real exposure is in the event of a nuclear event. When you're talking about other big exposures we have, earthquake and hurricane and cyber, I can, with some reasonable degree of accuracy, have a point of view in terms of how large our exposures can be and how big our loss can be. When it comes to a nuclear thing, I sort of surrender. It's very difficult for us to estimate how bad can be. Very many different lines of exposures will be affected by it. And even though in almost all our contracts we try and exclude nuclear as a covered peril, nevertheless, if something like that were to happen, I'm fairly positive that the regulators and the courts will hold it against the insurers, and they'll rewrite the contract and we'll be required to pay. For example, one thing which is already being talked about, we issue what are called fire policies. And these fire policies try and exclude nuclear as a covered peril. But there are several regulators who feel that, gee, if it's a fire policy and if the nuclear attack causes a fire, then how can you exclude fire? And you better include fire. So, debates like that we will have to live with, and it'll be very difficult for the insurance industry to fight back both the regulators and the court systems in terms of what is covered and what is not covered.
And there won't be any regulators or anybody else. So we'll leave it to a million years of reconstruction. Einstein said that, he said, I know not what the weapons will be for World War III, but I know the weapons for World War IV will be sticks and stones. There's a lot of things. I mean, it just, if you're worried about the effect of nuclear attacks, you got other things to worry about than the value of your Berkshire. I'll put it that way. and what other cheerful things? Station.
Warren, you want me to touch on the cyber?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'll just touch on the cyber because it was raised, and when you do think of Berkshire and they use Berkshire Hathaway Energy as a reference, but cyber risk and managing that risk, both at Berkshire, really falls across all of our subsidiaries, and it's a constant risk that's there. It's one of our greatest risks we're always evaluating and trying to literally defend against. And if we use Berkshire Hathaway Energy as an example, we would receive billions of attacks every day against our various operating systems. So that's basically what our team is in place for. Both they harden the assets to deflect it, and then evaluating the underlying attacks we have, every second of the day. And by the way, that would we'd have a number of operating subsidiaries that experience that, but obviously it's the rail and the energy and a few others that we spend a lot of time on, a lot of effort, a lot of resources. And the good news is that through to today, our teams have done an exceptional job. We really haven't had a significant event. We've had some minor events at small businesses, but across our major businesses, across our major operating systems, we've had the proper security protocol in place to avoid events, but it never stops. Our team would tell you that every day that's a risk they recognize and a risk they're addressing within the businesses. So a significant risk, but a significant priority for all of our operating teams.
Yeah, and I would add one thing. I think Greg knows way more about this than I do, but my impression from everything I've seen is that you always have, historically the private industry has always said the government can't do anything right, and and government always says that private industry is just thinking about itself, all these things. The truth is, from everything I've seen, is that the cooperation between government and business in terms of trying to minimize the threat of cyber problems, I think has been magnificent, basically.
Yeah, excellent point. When it comes to cyber, the collaboration between a variety of U.S. agencies and our individual businesses, it's incredibly strong, including down to the certain agencies will submit basically a lot of our operating data on a daily basis, where they're helping us go through it to identify if we have a bad character, a bad individual who's maybe penetrated into our system. So it's a strong collaboration, and Warren, you're absolutely right. It's very unique to see how both the industry and the government's working so closely. But I think we both recognize it as such a significant risk. We have to stay strongly aligned on the approach.
It's a real partnership. It's a
Yeah.
real partnership, and we can do better because the government is helping us, and the government can do better because we're helping them, and there's no lack of will on either side. And cyber, I mean, it blows your mind on sort of the nuclear is the number one threat, but it's a very, very, very low probability. Someday the sun will burn out too, but there's really no place for two countries with large ICBM possibilities and who knows what else and everything, but we haven't figured that out yet. It's easy to go around and say this is a solution or that's a solution, but if you have two people with loaded guns facing each other,
And not everybody is likely to be totally rational.
oh, well, we see so much irrationality in where people's self-interest is involved. They're doing all kinds of things to destroy themselves in terms of how they live their lives and everything. And it doesn't stop with as you move up the ladder. And some people do terrible things, and you just have to very much hope that they aren't in a position where they can do it all by themselves with the rest of the world as their supposed prize. Okay. If Station 3 will please ask something about motherhood and apple pie or something like that.
Okay. Dear Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, my name is Daphne. I'm from NYC, and this is my 5th annual shareholders meeting.
Well, we appreciate you coming. We do, sincerely.
As you know, for the past 4 consecutive months, we've been going through inflation with an inflation rate north of 7% for the first time since 1982. You both have experienced this before, from 1970 to 1975, at a time where your portfolio took paper losses, and yet you made some of the best investment choices of your life. Reflecting on that, my question is, if you had to pick one stock to bet on.
You kind of snuck up on us there for a second.
And be resilient in the inflation, which would you choose? And what specifically enables that stock to do very well and might very likely be a difficult market?
Well, I'll tell you something even better than that one stock. Maybe we'll get to one stock, but the best thing you can do is to be exceptionally good at something. If you're the best doctor in town, if you're the best lawyer in town, if you're the best whatever it may be, no matter whether people are paying you with $1 zillion or paying you, they're going to give you some of what they produce in exchange for what you deliver. And if you've got it, and if you're the one they pick out to do any particular activity, sing or play baseball or be their lawyer, whatever it may be, whatever abilities you have can't be taken away from you. They can't actually be inflated away from you. Somebody else will give you some of the wheat they produce or the cotton or whatever it may be, and they will trade you for the skill you have. So the best investment by far is anything that develops yourself. And it's not taxed, so that's what I would do.
I got some advice for you too. When you have your own retirement account and your friendly advisor suggests you put all the money into Bitcoin, just say no.
Yeah. Nobody can take away from you the talent you have. I mean, and the truth is that the world will always be willing. They'll need to do something, and some people will not have skills, and they will get less of the product of the society than somebody who has other skills. And sometimes that has something to do with education, but a good bit of the time it doesn't have anything to do with education. I mean, but to figure out what you'd like to be, and figure out how, and what you'd like to be is what you're going to likely be good at. And the world will always need somebody on that tube to tell us what's going on. So, study Becky Quick or somebody and figure out, what makes her good, and what you sort of naturally bring to the game. I mean, I could have. Who's the guy that says you got to spend 10,000 hours doing this or that? And then Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell, would say just spend 10,000 hours on something. Well, I could have spent 10,000 hours trying to become a heavyweight boxer, but I don't think I'd have felt very good at the end of the 10,000 hours. I mean, you stumble in to what you really like doing, what you're good at, what is useful to society, and then it doesn't make any difference whether the dollar bill, is now worth, in terms of the purchasing power, a cent or a half a cent or 1/100th of a cent. If you're the best doctor in town, they'll bring you chickens, whatever they may do, but they can't take it away from you. And my guess is that if you've come to 5 meetings, you've got a very good future ahead of you. I mean, that shows it. It self-selects. I mean, so if you want to sell a piece of yourself, we'll buy that as the best investment we can make. We'll take 10% of your future earnings, and we'll give you a cash payment now, and we'll have a terrific asset. And you can have 100% of your future earnings, and if you develop your talent, maybe you'll be a great dancer. People pay money to watch great dancers. We had Fred Astaire and his sister Adele that came from Omaha. Their name was Austerlitz then, but they could dance. And Adele did whatever she did with it, moved to England, and Fred Astaire went on to do a whole bunch of other things. And Ginger Rogers had to do it all the same backwards in high heels, and she didn't get paid as much because she was a woman. But you're going to do just fine. I bet a lot of money on you. Okay. Becky?
This question is for Warren and Ajit, and it comes from someone named Modi in Israel, who writes, "My family and I are long-term shareholders of Berkshire, and we plan to hold it forever. We like that the current management thinks in the long term to increase shareholder intrinsic value, but we aren't sure that at the time of the management change, the new management will act the same way you do. They might take risks in the insurance field where it's hard to find on the balance sheet, and that might take years to realize. We would like to know how we can assess the insurance risk today and in the future, or to know in time when you and Ajit are not here anymore.
Well, I would say that the future for a long time is about as assured as you can have in the world. We don't have an answer for the nuclear problem or anything, but we have a culture that A, has worked, B, has the shares and the shareholders that will carry it a long way. And the first year, let's say I die tomorrow, the first year, everybody says, what's going to happen? They're going to spend it all. They're going to do all these things. You've got the shares held in a place that it can't happen. You've got a board of directors that understands that our culture is 99.9% of running the business. They don't think that having meetings of the committees and bringing in outside experts or anything like that mean a thing. I mean, it's a process that the world has adopted, and they've done it for reasons we understand. But Berkshire is just plain different. We are a business that exists for people that trust us. And all we have to do to fulfill that trust is fairly simple things. We've got the people to do it. We've got unbelievable resources to do it. And it isn't that difficult as long as you've got the freedom, essentially, to do it. And the world will write stories a year after, so a year later, what has happened at Berkshire. The railroad will be run the same way. The big worry, of course, is that somebody comes in and figures they can make billions as a group, or people that sell the businesses and say it's better to be private, because, or it's better to be pure this or something like that. Well, we're a pure partnership, is what we're pure at, and we do have what we think is a special relationship with our owners, and I don't think the relationship changes, and the ownership doesn't change that much. And the truth is, nobody can take us over for a long, long time. And by that point, we would hope that maybe the superiority of this culture might be somewhat better understood by the world, and we will be here. If we have the same culture, we'll be here 100 years from now, assuming we haven't had nuclear exchange or something. But Berkshire is built to forever. There is no finish point. Nobody's waiting to retire or have their options vested or thinking about. We don't have anybody that's thinking about, should I take another job? It just doesn't. They're doing what they want to do in life, and it isn't because we're topping somebody else's offer, or that headhunters come around and say, we want this person or that person, and what will it take to get them? Well, they can't get them. I mean, now that's. I don't know whether we could build it again, but we've got it, and we didn't know we were building it exactly when we took over. When we had a lousy textile mill. I mean, it isn't like Charlie and I sat down. He didn't happen to be in Berkshire, but he was my partner and everything, and so we were mental partners. We didn't sit down and work out some plan that said, well, we'll run the dumb textile business for 20 years, and then we'll finally have to fold it, or then we'll do this and that and everything. We just kept putting one foot in front of the other, but we did know how we felt about running a public company. And one thing we wanted to do always was we wanted to have people that were in sync with us. We didn't really want that group I saw in the Flamingo, in 1952. We wanted people who trusted us. And we started, in my case, in a partnership. We started with 7. Charlie started a partnership. And this is the same thing. We didn't go to institutions, and we didn't pay fees to people to bring in money or anything like that. We sat down with people. In my case, I handed them a little sheet of paper, It has set the ground rules. And I wanted to be sure we were on the same page. I said, you don't have to read the partnership agreement. I mean, there's no way in the world I would be taking advantage of it. You shouldn't be here if you think I'd take. But I do want you to be on the same page and measuring me by the same yardsticks I measure myself. And those people stayed with me. And they're still, sure, they're their children, their children's children, they're shareholders of Berkshire, but they're partners. And it'd be hard to do that again, but I would do it with whatever. If I were going to be in this field, I would try and do the same thing. I would try to find people that trusted me. And I don't want to be with people that are saying, how'd you do versus the S&P, last month, or, what's your long short position or anything like that. I sold securities for 3 years, and it just, I just didn't want to be in that position where essentially they thought maybe that I could do things that I couldn't do. So I finally found a way to get a few people. I mean, I didn't actually stumble into it, but a few people that trusted me, and they just gave me their money, and we've lived happily ever after. So it's the new management's got them. And the management after them, and the management after them, they're just, excuse me, they're just custodians of a culture that's embedded. The owners believe in it. People that work there believe in it. And we're not saying other things can't do better or anything of the sort. We're just saying this is what we've got. And we have got the directors, we've got the share ownership and all of that, and the size that essentially can ward off any attempts to change the culture. And it's silly to talk about if our board members did this and did that, and and in the end, obviously we're always going to follow the law. And we're a Delaware company, we follow Delaware law. But that doesn't mean that we have to do what every other Delaware corporation does and how they look at the Delaware statute. We'll follow the law, and then we'll run it as a group of people who trust us, and we appreciate that trust. Charlie?
Well, I remember when you had a textile mill, and
I tried to forget it.
the textiles aren't really just congealed electricity the way modern technology works. And the TVA rates were 60% lower than the rates in New England. It was an absolutely hopeless hand, and you had the sense to fold it.
25 years later.
Well, you didn't pour more money into it.
No, that's right.
And no, recognizing reality when it's really awful and taking appropriate action just involves often just the most elementary good sense. How in the hell can you run a textile mill in New England when your competitors are paying way lower power rates?
I'll tell you another problem with it, too. I mean, the fellow that I put in to run it was a really good guy. And I mean, he was 100% honest with me in every way. He was a decent human being, and he knew textiles. And if he'd been a jerk, it would have been a lot easier. I would have probably thought differently about it. But we just stumbled along for a while, and then, we got lucky that Jack Ringwald decided to sell his insurance company, and we did this and that. But I even bought a second textile company in New Hampshire. I mean, I don't know how many, 7 or 8 years later. I mean, I'm going to talk some about dumb decisions. Maybe after lunch we'll do it a little. And it is incredible how many dumb decisions we made. Charlie and I bought that and Sandy got us when we bought that department store. And that was 1966. And we were working with our own money. And why in the world did we think? And Charlie flew to Baltimore, and I mean, we used to really work in those days. There again, we had wonderful people. Louis Cohen couldn't have been a better guy, but everybody in that business had a different reference point. They wanted to expand their company. Well, who can blame them for that? And they were planning a couple of new stores, and each department, the shoe department, said, "Well, we'll do it better this time," and all that kind of thing. But the whole idea was crazy, and we got there for a little while, and we figured it out finally, and
We reversed course.
yeah. But why the hell did we do it in the first place?
Well, because we were stupid.
Yeah, okay, well, that's important to realize. We paid $6 a share for that stock, and if the department store has succeeded, it might be worth $30 a share now, and it failed. So, but we did other things, and we merged it into Berkshire, and we'll talk about that a little later. And I don't know whether it's $150,000 a share now or something like that from the $6. So if it succeeded, we would have maybe made a few dollars, and because it failed, we made hundreds of thousands of dollars per share. But that's the way life is. You just keep going, and
keep learning. That's the secret.
keep learning.
Keep learning.
Keep learning. And you can say, why would it take guys that long to learn? And well, we got a few minutes before lunch. Let's address that problem, because I did bring something along on that. There have been, well, I started buying stocks when I was 11. I've been reading every book in the library on it. I loved it. My dad, it was his business, and I'd get to go down to his office and I'd read the books down there, and I saved the money, and finally, by the time I was 11, I could buy a stock, and I could tell you at that time, I went to New York Stock Exchange when I was 9. My dad took us to New York, each kid to New York once, and he took me. I went to the New York Stock Exchange, and I was in awe of it. I could tell you how the specialist system worked and the odd lot arrangements, and I could tell you history of finance and all of these things. And then I got very interested in technical analysis and charted stocks, and did all kinds of crazy things, hours and hours and hours, and saved money to buy other stocks, and tried shorting, and I just did everything. And then when I was either 19 or 20, and I can't remember exactly where I did it or something, I picked up a book someplace. It wasn't a textbook at school, but it was in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I looked at this book, and I saw one paragraph, and it told me I'd been doing everything wrong. I just had the whole approach wrong. I thought I was in the business of trying to pick stocks that would go up, and in one paragraph, I saw that was totally foolish, and I left. I brought something that it's really interesting. Let's put up. What do we call this chart? I don't think we. Oh, here we are. Yeah. Let's put up illusion 1. Done. Yeah, there we have it. Now if you look at that, some people will see two faces. Some people will see a base. And some people will look a long time and only see two faces. But the mind flips from one side to another, and that's, well, there's some name for it that they call it ambiguous illusions or something of the sort. There's other things that talk about aha moments, or in the old comic strips with Popeye, Wimpy would have a little balloon over his head and the light bulb would go on. There's this point where all of a sudden you see something you haven't seen. Well, it took me, I had an illusion that I was looking at, we'll say in that one, two phases. Let's go to the one labeled 2. And if you're looking at it from one side, it looks like a rabbit, and if you look the other way, it looks like you're looking at a duck. And you know, the mind is a very funny place, and I think people call it an apperceptive mass when you have all kinds of things going on in your mind, and they go on for years, and they sit there and get lost, and then all of a sudden, you see something different than what you were seeing before. Now, it took me in stocks, which I was intensely interested in. I had a decent IQ, and I was reading and thinking, and and it was important to me to make some money on it. I had every motivation in the world. And then I read a paragraph, actually, in chapter 8, I think it was, of The Intelligent Investor. And it told me that I wasn't looking at the duck, I was looking, now it was the rabbit, whatever it may be. And whether you call it a light bulb, whether you call it, a moment of truth, whatever it may be. And that happened to me in Lincoln. I mean, it changed my life. If I hadn't read that book, I don't know how long I would have gone on looking for Head and Shoulders formations and 200-day moving averages and the odd-lot ratios and a zillion things. And I love that kind of stuff, except it was the wrong stuff I was looking at. And I've had that happen, and Charlie's had it happen, I'm sure. It happens a few times in your life, and all of a sudden, you see something important that, why in the hell didn't I see this in the first place? Maybe it's a week ago, maybe it's a year ago, maybe it's 5 years ago, maybe it's learning how to get along with people. I mean, whether actually it's better to be, kind or not, or whether, I mean, they're just learning how to have, if you want the world to love you, what you have to do, or what, it's, you know it when you see it, but you didn't see it for 10 years before. And I don't know whether Charlie's got some thoughts on that or not, but that's happened in a few situations in business where I've looked at a company for a decade, and then there's something that it just all gets rearranged in your mind, and you can say, well, why didn't I see this 5 years ago? But usually, I've had it happen a few times, obviously, and everybody here has, and just in different areas of their lives. And you think, how could I have been so stupid? Well, that's what Charlie's, when he was in the law practice, he had a partner, Roy Tolles, and every smart guy that would get in trouble, usually it was guys, and usually it was with women, they'd come into the office and they'd look, down-faced and everything, and they'd say, it seemed like a good idea at the time, I mean, and their lives unraveled, in many cases. So there is that apperceptive mass that's sitting in there inside somehow, and every now and then it produces some insight. It's better, actually, if it produces insight into your behavior than whether it produces insight to make money. I mean, and some people never get it, and they wonder why whether their kids hate them or whether there's nobody in the world that would give a damn whether they live or die. In fact, they prefer they die, because then been courting them for their art collection or whatever it may be. It just, Charlie would say, just write your obituary and reverse engineer it. And not a crazy idea. Charlie, I don't know, what do you know about apperceptive masses, which are optical illusions?
Well, I know that that's the way the brain works, and that it's easy to get it wrong. And part of the trick is to get so you correct your own mistakes. And we've done a lot of that.
Yeah.
Frequently way too late.
Yeah, we've done better with the mistakes than we have with the reasonably good ideas.
Well, it's so easy to overdo a good idea. That's what's going on now. You have a lot of good ideas that are being grossly overdone.
Well, just tell me about one that hasn't been, but tell me later when the crowd isn't listening. That's where.
Well, look what happened to Robin Hood, from its peak to its trough. Wasn't that pretty obvious that something like that was going to happen?
Tell me again what it should have
Robin Hood, when it came out and it went public and
Oh.
got lured everybody in all the short-term gambling and big commissions and hidden kickbacks and so on and so on. It was disgusting.
Yeah. And it says so last year, and they got mad at you, and they sold a bunch of their stock, and they got the money, and
Yeah, but now it's unraveling.
Yeah.
God is getting just.
but a lot of the insiders have they've gotten a lot of money from it. I mean, they were big sellers, as I remember.
That may be, but
Yeah.
there's been some justice.
Well, I have to agree with that. But it's a good idea to go around making enemies of people, though. That's another question, which we do. Is it wise to criticize people at all?
Probably not, but I can't help it.
Well, and here's the smartest guy I know, and he's 98, and he hasn't figured it out yet. So, I mean, give up. Enjoy. Well, with that, we'll go to lunch, and we'll try to come back wiser at 1 o'clock. And thank you. Okay, let's reconvene. I think we sold 15 boats so far. I was told that a little while ago out there, so get them while they last. We won't have the first one available for delivery for about a year, but people are getting 10% off, whatever that means, who order one, and I've ordered one myself, and things are going well in the other room, and we only got 7 questions, which is the new low in the first half, so we'll try and move a little faster. I can't imagine why it went that slowly. I mean, who's doing all that talking? Okay. Station 4.
Hi, Warren and Charlie. I'm Jeff Malloy, shareholder from San Francisco. In recent years, American companies have taken on a more active role in the political realm, whether it is speaking out against specific bills or promoting various social causes, often at the behest of shareholder or employee groups. While the goals of these movements can be laudable, they risk alienating significant portions of customer and employee bases. How should CEOs decide which issues to take a stand on, or whether their companies should engage in the political realm at all? Thank you.
That's a terrific question. And that is one, obviously, I've had to think about plenty. And at one point, I said I don't put my citizenship in a blind trust when I take the job as CEO of Berkshire. But I've also learned that you can make a whole lot more people sustainably mad than you can make temporarily happy by speaking on any subject. And on certain subjects, they will take it out on our companies. And that means that the people that are employed by us, some of them we would end up letting go. It means that the shareholders get hurt. And do I really think that it's so important that I talk on every possible subject that people can get very upset about, whether they should be asked to pay that price? And I've come to the conclusion the answer is no. Why in the world do I want to hurt the people in that other room that do all kinds of things for Berkshire? Why do I want to hurt you because I say something that 20% of the country is going to instantly disagree with, and sometimes they will be so upset about it that they will try and take it out. And since they can't scream at me, they may have campaigns against their companies or anything else. So I think it applies to me. I'm not going to go around and take positions where instead of saying Warren Buffett says, it will say, Berkshire Hathaway or Warren Buffett of Berkshire Hathaway. I get it identified, and I do not want to make the lives of you, and I just decided I'm not going to be doing that. And if I want to do that, I should quit my job. And if I think my citizenship, speaking out, is that important, I'll give up what I love the most, which is having this job. I don't want to do that. So I've decidedly backed off. I don't want to say anything that will get attributed basically to Berkshire and have somebody else bear the consequences of what I talk about. And so that's where I stand. And I can tell you that at most companies, or many, that isn't fair, but in a great many companies, the CEOs, they have to think about what their board says to them, and they've made a point of electing people to their boards because it's socially acceptable, who represent different constituencies, sometimes very strongly. And if they think they're stakeholders for this group and that group and that group, they'll get pressured by their boards to take positions, and it's just a territory that we're not going to get into. Charlie, how do you feel about that?
Well, even more than you, I have to be very careful about what I say.
Now, and the difference between the two of us is I can't resist saying a little more. I see headlines in papers just time after time after time that say, Buffett's buying such and such. Well, I'm not buying such and such. Berkshire Hathaway is buying it, and it may be the work of two other people that work at Berkshire. And the people who write the articles don't have the faintest idea whether it was at my instigation or whether I'd even ever heard of it. And but the headline will attract more people if it says Buffett buying this than if it says Berkshire Hathaway and we don't know whether it's the people that work for him or him. And the headline is designed to bring people into the story. So the confusion is terrible. And the easiest thing to do is to basically shut up and not have a bunch of people facing consequences that they didn't ask for in in the first place. So with that, but I'm glad you asked that question. That is a good question. And I probably thought more about that question than I think about whether this stock or that stock is cheap. And with that, we'll go to, well, let's see, that was station 4. We'll go back to Becky.
On that note, let's go to a question from David Cass. He writes in, President Biden's fiscal 2023 budget request would impose a 20% minimum tax on the unrealized capital gains for households worth at least $100 million. What are your views on this issue? And if you don't want to answer, maybe Charlie does.
Well, we'll find out. And we should, in all honesty, we should both say that we would be affected by it. If it's 100 million, we'd both be affected. So our point of view is, and I have no point of view. Charlie, I have no point of view that I would want attributed to.
I tend to stay out of the income tax things like this. My policy is I pay whatever taxes they pass, and I don't want to engage in lobbying about taxes.
Yeah, and I would add one thing. Lobbying is really distasteful. I once did it for a candidate, and I ended up in a room with a bunch of lobbyists for cigarette companies. They didn't care about Nebraska. They didn't care about it. They didn't have anything. They were there because they were handing over a contribution. They didn't, and I was a convenient accessory, and you know, it made you want to throw up, basically. On the other hand, we operate in the railroad business, energy business, insurance business, and they're extensively regulated. And I don't also want to be the only railroad that stays out of the railroad group, the only insurance company that stays out of the insurance group. So, you know, other people can rightly figure that we're a free rider under those circumstances. So I tell the managers generally, you know, don't spend Berkshire's money on candidates that you like. Don't pressure suppliers to do it. I mean, Berkshire is not a weapon to use, and it's been used by certain people in the organization, but don't use it to muscle money out of anybody else for who you like or what school your wife went to or whatever it may be. And some of it goes on anyway. But I don't tell our people that don't belong to any trade associations. Charlie wrote one of the great letters of all time. And if you go to search, type in, I think, 1989 Munger savings and loan or something. We resigned from the U.S. Savings and Loan League, I guess it was, and we warned them. We said, we just cannot stand, you know, what you're doing to the country. And when a bunch of very nice people get together, but they decide it's in the interest of their savings and loan to do this or that. And we warned them, and finally Charlie wrote a letter, which is, like I say, available on search. And it's one of the, well, should be one of the proudest letters, certainly one of the proudest letters that's ever come out of Berkshire. And he just said, we can't stand it anymore, and we're resigning. And but that's a very tough thing to do. You can't. It's a tough way to live, to just go around criticizing the people you work with and the neighbors, and they're perfectly decent people, but they run into institutions that are doing things that are very distasteful to them, and we support some of our subsidiaries in energy, and you know, I don't want to find people who are doing it for personal reasons. I mean, in that case, they're in trouble. But I don't say they can't do it because I don't want their hands tied if something comes up, and essentially either they're competitors within the industry or the industry versus this. We're not going to stand alone and say, well, were morally superior to us, so you put your money up and fight it. So that's where I end up. Charlie?
I've got nothing to add.
Okay. It never bothers me when I don't have anything to add, but he seems stuck on that. Anyway, Becky, did that come from you?
It did.
Yeah, okay. Then station 5.
Oh, thank you, Warren and Charlie. My name is Tong Yao. I'm from China and now studying in the University of Chicago. I really admire you two, especially Charlie. You are my idol since I was a child. And my question is also for Charlie. My question is how to practice the multidisciplinary framework in making investment decisions and in life. Like how to make it more practical. Thank you.
Charlie?
Well, obviously, it helps you to know more than one discipline. There's an old saying, that a man who carries only a hammer thinks everything else is a nail. And you make a lot of wrong decisions if you don't have some command of all the disciplines. That's all I ever said. But you do irritate people terribly when you come into their territory. You say, I'm multidisciplinary, you're the expert, and I know better than you. They hate you for it. I can attest to it. I've done it several times.
Yeah, and China, well, to a certain degree, they have a culture that to some extent reveres age. So Charlie's got me beat. I don't even try and compete with him on China. I can't catch him on age. Okay. I'm going to try to, though. Let's see. We've got Becky coming next.
This question comes from Philip King. He writes, in the 70s, you wrote an article entitled, How Inflation Swindles the Equity Investor. You said that stocks cannot keep pace with inflation because companies cannot increase the return on equity. Do you believe that this is still the case?
Yeah, and of course, bonds can swindle the equity investor too. Everything, inflation, I should say, swindles the bond investor too. And it swindles the person who keeps their cash under their mattress. It swindles almost everybody. And the problem, if you have a business that doesn't take any capital, and let's just say the dollar depreciates 90% or something, so things cost 10 times as much. If it doesn't take any capital, you can charge 10 times as much, and you've kept your relative position. But most businesses take some capital. If our utility business, just say that the dollar is worth 1/10 some years hence from now, we have to have 10 times the capital investment, basically. And we get paid a return on that. But we have forced capital investment to essentially keep them in the same place. And I wrote an article that related to that. And I will tell you one famous story, which you will all sympathize with, and that I wrote that story for Fortune. And when I finished it, it was about 7,000 words. And Fortune didn't like publishing 7,000 words, and they had my friend Carol Loomis explain that to me, knowing that I would pay more attention to her than anybody else, but being stubborn and male, I said, every word is precious, and they can either run it or not. So then they sent an editor, a very nice guy, out to Omaha, and this guy explained to me that it just wasn't right to use that many words. And I said, well, that's fine, but if you don't do it, I'll write it someplace else. Very disgusting behavior on my part. And then I sent it. It was beginning to bother me a little. So I sent it to my friend Meg Greenfield, and Meg was a great, great, great editor at the Washington Post, and we were very, very good friends. Wonderful woman. And Meg, who was tough as nails with most writers, but she was kind of nice. She didn't want to really hurt me too much. So I said, well, Meg, what do you think? And she said, well, Warren, she says, you don't have to tell everything you know in this article. and it made the point. And so I'd write that article shorter, and but I'd say more or less the same thing. No, you're better off if you really could have a totally stable unit of monetary use for the next 100 years. It would be better for business and investors in general. Charlie? No? We will go to Station 6. Inflation is, the question is how much, and the question is whether you can decide that 2% and keep it. The answer is nobody knows. I mean, you do not know, and nobody knows. You can list all kinds of stuff, but nobody knows how much inflation there will be over the next 10 years or 20 years or 50 years or next month. And people talk about it all the time because you're interested in knowing the answer to your question. And they don't know the answer, but there are a lot of people that will tell you they know the answer if you pay them enough, and other people that will tell you for nothing because they think it enhances their prestige and makes them more valuable and all that. But the answer is they don't know, and we don't know either. The best protection against inflation, though, still is your own personal earning power. If you play the violin very well, you will do reasonably well during inflation. I mean, play it better than other people. People will pay you for doing that if you all kinds of things. So your skills will not be taken away, and your money may be. Okay, Station 6. Oh, wait a second. Was that?
That's right.
Is it Becky next? Becky?
That's right. It's Station 6.
Yeah, Station 6, okay.
My name is Martin Wiegand. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, thank you for your lifetime of teachings and for hosting us back in Omaha this year.
Well, thank you.
You have mentioned that companies get the shareholders they deserve. And in this year's letter, you mentioned a great satisfaction of yours is working for the individual long-term shareholders. With the growing influence of institutional index funds, how can management teams foster a shareholder culture like the one we have at Berkshire? Thank you.
Well, fortunately, we have it. And we know more about how to keep it than to institute one. And it's very interesting. We have 1,470,000 Class A shares outstanding today. That's fewer than we had a year ago in there. Those seats are filled. I mean, the shareholders are in place. We like the group we have. So why in the world, when we got a fixed number of seats, should we go out and recruit other people to replace you? I mean, the ideal shareholder group we can have is the group we have today. And if we had a church, we'd want the people to keep coming back week after week after week. If we had a limited number of seats and we had some wonderful parishioners, and we would not go out and recruit another 50 or 100 of them and have to throw out 50 or 100 of the ones we already had. And every company I know virtually, is wooing new people to come in, and whether they're improving the group they get or not is another. I mean, it strikes us as basically crazy. We don't want anybody different than we have now, and we're not going to get rid of the index funds, so we have to get rid of people like you, and we don't want to get rid of people like you. And I just don't understand why if you had a neighborhood and the size of the terrain or whatever it was would be such that you could have 10 neighbors, and they were all great neighbors, why in the world would you go out and say to a whole bunch of people going up and down the street, why don't you buy the house of the guy next to me? It is weird, but there's an awful lot of people who make their living by doing that, and they never really question. I would sort of ask any company that's making analyst presentations every month or something, which of the present ones are you trying to get rid of? Basically, because you're not going to have more. I hope you're not going to have more shares outstanding at the end of the year than you have now. And am I supposed to, get out of the way so some other fund that is thinking about what your stock is going to do next week replaces me? It is a very, very, very weird situation. And of course, the really crazy process that has developed is people talking to, we'll say, analyst group, the sort of the high priests of finance. Some companies are doing it more than once a month. Well, just imagine if you work for that company, you go to work for that company, and every month people are repeating these things about their company, that it's important that we have more services per customer, and it's 6.2, and we got to get to 7 or something like that. And they'd say that month after month after month. It becomes a catechism. And CEO says it, or his or her representative says it, and it goes, how do you go on the next month and say, by the way, we were really wrong, and this is what we should be working on? You don't say that. And it's a terrible problem that the new CEO has coming in after a previous CEO has said the important thing to do is to hit your earnings targets. Well, he's been meeting them in all probability by cheating from time to time. And this guy hands you the baton, and are you going to come out and say, well, we've really been cheating a little, and it's really counterproductive to the development of the companies, not to make earnings projections and just to give you the results as they come rather than making up a few things in the accounting department? They can't do it. You can't. It's not human nature. And besides, you wouldn't get appointed as a successor, but you just don't go in and say, we've been perpetuating these myths that we can always deliver 8% growth, or we can do this or do that, or that the most important thing is this. You can't go in and change that if every month you've been preaching to people that this is what we stand for, and just ask another question and carry this message out to the masses, to the analysts and all that. And it's a totally destructive policy. I mean, I can within GAAP accounting, and I can play a lot of games with numbers. We've done a lot of dumb things at Berkshire. We have never told anybody that the number had to be this or that, or to change anything. I mean, once you start it, it's all over. You can't quit. It's like taking $5 out of the cash register. The first time you take the $5 out, you say, well, I'm going to put it back. And then Do it a few times and you'll never stop. In fact, do it once and you probably never stop. But if something is going to be destructive, the thing to do is not start it. And forecasting earnings, I can't imagine anything more destructive. I got 360,000 people out there, and they know whether I'm lying or not, a good many of them. And they know if they send in figures and they get changed, what message are you telling them? We've got one dramatic illustration of that within Berkshire, and it's just, we want to. If you start lying, you got a big problem. It's that simple. And if you start saying to your team that somehow you got a job, you got shareholder relations, your job is to go out and tell everybody that our stock is the best thing among thousands of choices to buy every day. Well, that's crazy. And so what do you tell them? Well, they try to see which way the wind is blowing and figure out what they have to tell people, and then they go out and tell them. And then if you're a human and you've said we're going to earn $3.59 a share, you can get to $3.59. You can get there quite a while. And you can have audit committee, you have all these processes. But if you have a culture of lying, the processes really don't. They just disappear. And Charlie and I have seen it, well, probably every time we've gone on a board. Charlie, tell them about it.
Well, I think Berkshire's culture is going to last a long time after we're gone. And I think it should, and I think it'll prosper pretty well. The rest of corporate America is quite different. And it gets more different, I think, with each passing decade. And it's getting very peculiar. Pretty soon they're going to hold all the shareholders' meetings online, and the shareholders won't even come. And it's getting very peculiar, and the index funds get more and more important in the voting. And it's like everything else in life. It changes, and not always in ways you like.
And it ends up for selecting different CEOs and all kinds of things. I mean, you're not going to appoint a successor CEO that's going to come in and said everything that's been done before is, it's been kind of fraudulent. I mean, if we needed to book an extra sale after the end of the quarter, if we needed to adjust the reserves, and it's once you start lying, it's all over. And I just don't know any way around that except to try every way you can to not. You sure can't. If you set the wrong example at the top, you got a real problem. We've never told anybody to change a figure. We never will. And if they had been changing figures, we'd be in all kinds of trouble because they know it and I know it and the next person would know it, and it just deteriorates. And we've really seen it. We've really seen it time after time. The way boards operate, it has to be process oriented. I mean, I understand the problems that Delaware has in writing a statute that judges face when they look at things, but it's extraordinary. It's just extraordinary what an emphasis on process can do to an organization because they think they can do anything if it's allowed, and eventually the foundation crumbles. Okay. Oh, I should make a little news here. So, you've all come, and you may or may not see this, but it's very possible one of the things we bought, one of the things I bought, it was bought for a different purpose by a different manager months earlier. He bought roughly 15 million shares of Activision. And I never paid, I knew about the company, but I would just see it at the monthly report. But then on January, I don't know, 17th or 18th, something like that, Microsoft announced they were going to buy Activision for $95 a share. Now, when they announced that, at that point, Activision becomes a different kind of security. It becomes what Charlie and I used to call, well, everybody did, 50 years ago, we call them workouts or something like that, and they become known as arbitrage. Well, they're not really arbitrage, but they're securities, they're, in this case, a common stock, whose value depends not on what the market price does, but whether a given corporate event occurs, an announced corporate event occurs. Well, Microsoft wants to buy Activision, we'll say. Well, they said at $95 a share. And they've got the money, and obviously mergers and big mergers, tech companies, all kinds of things, have got all kinds of problems with the world generally in terms of opinion. So you don't know what the Justice Department will do, or you don't know what the EU will do, and all kinds of things. But at that point, it becomes a different security. And Charlie and I, 50 years ago, we used to do a lot of that sort of thing. And Gus Levy did it at Goldman Sachs, and we even went back one time, I think, on British Columbia Power, didn't we, Charlie?
Yeah, we certainly did.
Yeah. A guy named Bennett was up there, and we were trying to figure out whether some takeover of the power business. I mean, we spent a lot of time analyzing the probabilities of announced deals going through, and we call them workouts. Now the term became ARB, and it hasn't worked overall too well in recent years. Now, every now and then, I see something that I want to do in that field, but very seldom, because they got to be big. The profit is limited. You know, if they say you're going to get 95, you're not going to get 96, and you may, if the deal blows up, you may have a stock that's at 40 or something. So but we did it with Monsanto 5 or 6 years ago when Bayer was buying it, and we got very lucky because it turned out to be a terrible acquisition for Bayer, but it did go through because Bayer had the money, and they went through with the deal, even though Monsanto came with a problem that nobody really understood the extent of. And we did it with Red Hat when IBM bought it. So, in any event, on January, whatever it was, 17th, 18th, 19th, Microsoft announces it, and the stock, which had been at 60, well, let's see I may have a slide here, which I'll find, but in any event, the stock, which had been in the 60s, went up to the 81 or 2, and that looked like not a big enough spread to me for a few days. And then it settled back a little. So anyway, we now own 9.5%, something like 9.5% of Activision. And if we went over 10%, we would file a report. So in order that the news people don't feel that there's no news there, I can tell you that as of yesterday, we own about 9.5%. If we go past 10%, there'll be a form filed with the SEC and so on. But it is my purchases, not the manager who bought it some months ago. If the deal goes through, we make some money, and if the deal doesn't go through, who knows what happens. But I just want to be sure that if we do file that report, people understand very clearly, because there's been some very mixed up stories on that in the past. We want to be very clear that it was Warren Buffett's decision in that particular case, And he doesn't know what the Justice Department's going to do. He doesn't know what the EU is going to do. He's never talked to anybody in Microsoft about it or anything. He's just read a document. He's made his own assessment, and it can change. And at one time, I think we sold a few shares even when I thought it was a little higher than it should be. And turned out those sales were not bad sales. And so I just want to create a little news for you, and I want to, if possible, head off stories which have been incorrect in the past, and which then get picked up by other media, and corrections never get written. That all the corrections were written by one inaccurate story, and they apologized even to me. Both the reporter and the editor sent me a personal note of apology. And they didn't expect to make a mistake, but when the other publications picked up the story, they didn't bother to pick up the correction, and millions of people were misinformed, and probably literally by the time it gets spread around. This one I will attempt to head off by telling you exactly what the facts are right now, and we'll see whether we go beyond 10%. But if, it could easily be that if it went up a few dollars, it's still a $95 deal. It's still, we don't know what the Justice Department will do. We don't know what the EU will do. We don't know what 30 other jurisdictions will do. One thing we do know is Microsoft has the money, so that takes that one risk out of it. So anyway, Charlie, do you have any news to break?
No.
Yeah, and incidentally, I don't talk this over with Charlie. I mean, he knows what that occasionally I'll see an arbitrage deal and do it, and 50 years ago we were doing it together, and his general feeling is, why is Warren fooling around with this kind of stuff even? But it's the old fire horse. But occasionally it looks like the odds are in our favor. But absolutely, we can lose money on that company, and fairly large sums of money, depending on what happened if the deal blows up. And there will be a lot of people that want the deal to blow up. But Microsoft doesn't want it to blow up, so we'll have to see what happens. Okay. Enough. Becky.
Charlie just mentioned index funds in passing, so let's go to this question from Matt Feigl. His question is related to the growth of passive investing through index funds and ETFs. He says, passive investment vehicles now control upwards of 50% of the United States stock market. The actual owners of these passive investment vehicles decided passive investing makes the most sense for them, yet in doing so, passive investors have empowered the large index funds to become the biggest activists in the market. These passive managers now enjoy enormous, and I would argue undue, influence over corporate governance. Do Warren or Charlie see any benefit or logic to a rule that would prohibit passive investment vehicle managers from voting the shares they control for their passive investment clients?
Well, I'll take that. I think the guy's right. I think the thing is out of control and counterproductive. And I don't think it's good for the country to have 3 passive investors with bright young men from Harvard or what else telling them what proper governance of corporations is. It's not a good development. And it is, and I think indexing, if it gets to 90%, then it won't work very well at all. But at the moment, it's worked fine.
Yeah. Well, the one thing you can count on, too, is that if it does look like it's going to, if the public opinion shifts over to the idea that it really is a good idea to let 3 people decide the fate of every company in corporate America, the 3 people, and they won't collaborate or do anything. They're evil people in the least. I mean, they're just doing what you and I would do. They would figure, we don't care that much about voting. What we do care about is keeping a lot of assets under management. So we'll we'll figure out something that ends up reflecting public opinion, and then politicians won't get mad at us. And our only threat really is the politicians get mad at us and regulate us in some ways. So we'll head it off. And I would predict fairly confidently that if the American public doesn't like the idea of three people controlling things, the three people and their organizations and everything, but what they want to do is they want to get bigger. And they wouldn't be where they are in life if they hadn't wanted to get bigger. Those things don't happen by accident. That doesn't mean it's the only thing they want. They want their investors to get good results and everything. But they are certainly not going to follow a policy which is going to cause a backlash that causes them to be a lot smaller. They can figure out their self-interest. I mean, and it just so happens that in this case, it would achieve the right result, which is that they would not control America, but they'll do what's good for themselves, and what they have to do, what's politically acceptable. The only thing that really can mess up what is a very good deal for them is to have Congress change the rules, and the rules were the Investment Company Act of 1940 really changed how people behaved, and it's governed things in a big way for a very long time. And anybody that takes on the federal government loses. And if you're talking about trying to do that sort of thing, and they don't need to do it. They just say, well, we'll give up voting, or we'll vote our shares as the rest of people do. And of course, if you vote your shares as the rest of the people do, then if the index funds had 90% of the country, you could take over a company by somebody else buying 3 or 4% because you'd automatically get the funds to follow your very small little percentage. You'll see it all play out. I mean, it's a big case, but it's not an unusual case. Okay, station 7.
Yeah, Eric Erda, and I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I want to first say thank you so much for a lifetime of knowledge you have both graciously shared with all of us. You've contributed greatly to push our species forward. Moreover, you've taught all of us here, along with many, many millions not here, how to behave more rationally, treat one another with more love, and lead more fulfilling lives. And for that, I want to say a very sincere thank you.
Thank you.
As for my question, I want to ask about Berkshire Hathaway Energy and the unique structure that has evolved there, given that Berkshire doesn't own 100% of the company. The first part of that question is related to Greg's ownership and his corresponding incentive alignment with overall Berkshire. Now, there's a wise man named Charlie that in 1995, at a speech to Harvard, taught us how important incentives are to human behavior. I would conservatively say that Greg's stake in BHE is worth more than $500 million at present. And I'm curious if you can share any plans that you have to convert his Berkshire Hathaway Energy ownership to Berkshire stock. And if there isn't a plan to do this, can you please explain why we shouldn't be concerned about Greg's incentive structure going forward? The second part is about leverage at the entity. You have always said that BHE operates with an appropriate amount of leverage given its earning power. With that said, it's still a very, very large debt figure in relation to current earnings, especially with what we have become accustomed to at Berkshire. And I'm curious, if Berkshire owned 100% of Berkshire Hathaway Energy, would you still operate the business with the same amount of leverage?
Okay, thank you. The second part is the easiest one to answer, so I'll take that. And I'll throw the first one back to Charlie. But the Berkshire Hathaway Energy actually is required with its regulated utilities, and it basically started pretty much with regulated utilities, and still is dominated by that, and we're interested in buying more regulated utilities. It's required in different ways by different states and by different regulatory authorities to have a large amount of debt, because the regulatory authorities will say, in Iowa or to pick any state, the regulatory authorities are going to say you can get debt money cheaper than you can get equity money, which historically has largely been, almost always been true. And they say that since we're going to allow you a return on equity, we'll say, just pick a figure, but let's say they allow us a return on equity of 9%, and we can borrow a lot of capital at 3%, they say it'll result in higher rates to customers if you use it, put in all equity. We would love to have all equity in our utilities, but we wouldn't, the regulator wouldn't stand for it, because it would result in, under the traditional system, it would result in higher prices to consumers. So that's built into the system. And we would, well, our regulator wouldn't allow us essentially to get the same return on equity and have an all equity structure. And the answer is, we put, well, you actually saw in the film earlier, which the people that are listening or hearing the webcast didn't see, but just in Iowa, we recently got approval to spend $3.5 billion, but they want us, Iowa has a history in, like every other state in the union, except Nebraska, which is all public power. But every private powers, they have a history of wanting X percent to be in debt. They want you to raise a lot of money in debt because it's cheaper, means cheaper power for the consumer. So the answer is, if we owned 100% of Berkshire Energy, we would absolutely be following the same. We would be operating pursuant to what the utility commissions tell us they want us to do. That they represent the people of those states. Now, Charlie, do you want?
Well, the other one's simple too. It's a historical accident. It's not causing any big tension or breaches of fiduciary duty. We had the same problem with Walter Scott, who was the director for years and years, and owned stock in the same company, also an historical accident. I just don't think it's a big problem at all. I see no behavior from Greg ever that isn't in the best interest of Berkshire.
Yeah. And we've had various percentages of Berkshire Hathaway Energy ever since we bought it in around 2000. And it happened, we were at my sister who's here, we were at her house, and there was a party going on, and 20 or 30, probably 30 people. And Walter said to me, if you got a minute or two, I'd like to talk to you about something. So we went in the library or someplace, and Walter says, we've got this company and it doesn't seem to fit the public mold very well, and would you want to buy in and go private? And I said, sure, depends on the price. And when we got back to Omaha, I was out on the West Coast, we got back to Omaha, and we met with Dave Sokol, who was the big holder, aside from Walter. And we agreed on a price. And I remember Walter saying to Dave, don't negotiate with Warren. He'll tell you to forget it and he'll do something else. And so we bought it. And so it was kind of a weird structure from the start. And we had a public utility holding company act to deal with and all kinds of things. And it's evolved. And it now has us with 91% roughly, and it has Walter's estate, and I don't know where that goes at all. And Walter never talked to me about it, and I never asked him about it. But it's one way or another interest connected with him, and the estate now, close to 8, I guess. And Greg's got 1, and from our standpoint, if we made a deal with if they ever came to us and the Scott interest wanted to do something, we'd say fine with him. We'll do the same thing with Greg if he wants to, and he probably would want to. I mean, but from our standpoint, I've never seen any decision remotely. If I thought that would make a difference, he would not be. He just wouldn't be the right kind of person to run Berkshire. And the problem, of course, is that you've got lots of process that can be involved with insiders and everything. And I've got no interest in, as long as I'm alive, my interests are 100% with Berkshire. And the board would probably, and to some extent, a little reluctantly, but they just say, well, if Warren thinks the deal's okay, it must be okay, which is true. And so I could make a deal with anybody and it doesn't get all messed up with process. But on the other hand, if I'm not around, the pressures are the directors to do whatever the lawyers tell them to do, and the lawyers tell them to do this and that, and then they want to bring in investment bankers to make a value. And the whole thing is a game from that point forward. And it's expensive. It takes a lot of time. So it would be better if it happened while I'm alive and around. But there's no reason. We'd rather have 100% than 91%, obviously, because more earnings for Berkshire. But there's no reason to try and do anything with either the Scott interests or Greg, unless they want to do it. And the logical thing is if anything happened with the Scotts, we'd certainly offer it to Greg. But who knows what happens in the future. The one thing I guarantee you, Berkshire Hathaway holders will never be taken advantage of, and you can sue my estate or something like that if anybody felt differently about that. It isn't going to happen. But it's a lot easier if it's done while I'm around, actually, than if it's done later. But
I wish we had 20 more conflicts of interest just like it.
Yeah, that's exactly true. Yeah, it's a perfectly logical question. I mean, but it is not a problem, and any answer that's arrived at will be good for all concerned. And right now, I've got no feeling that I have no knowledge at all of where the stock that the Scotts have goes, or how they feel about it, or anything. And that's up to them. Walter was our partner, and as far as we're concerned, we treat anybody connected with him as our partner, and they know that. They don't have to worry about us taking advantage of them, and we can understand why. If they don't do anything, we can understand that. If they want to do something, we can understand that. It's a good question, though. Thank you. Okay, Becky.
This question comes from Steve Blackmore in Bozeman, Montana. This is to Charlie. He says, in the past, you've made favorable statements about investing in China, in part based upon valuation metrics. What is your opinion now, and how much weight do you put on the actions of the government in your analysis? Do the recent Communist Party activities in China, including human rights violations, blatant cyber theft from U.S. companies and others, crackdowns on speech from business and media, et cetera, cause you to change your opinion on investing in China? And how do you evaluate the clear dangers of investing under authoritarian regimes, as recently evidenced by Russian atrocities in Ukraine?
Well, those are good questions, and there's no question about the fact that the government of China has worried the investors from the United States who invest in China more in recent months and years than he did in earlier periods. So there's been some tension, and it's affected the prices of some of the Chinese stocks, particularly internet stocks. Just in the last day or two, the Chinese leader has sort of reversed course on that and said he went too far and he's going to pull way back and so on and so on. So we're having some hopeful signs. But yes, there are more difficulties of dealing with the regime in China than there are in the United States. And it's different. It's a long way away, and they've got their own culture and their own loyalties and so on and so on. And the reason that I invested in China is I could get so much better companies at so much lower prices, and I was willing to take a little political risk to get into the better companies at the lower prices. Other people might reach the opposite conclusion, and everybody is more worried about China now than they were 2 or 3 years ago. So that's just the way it is.
I have nothing to add. Okay. Station 8.
Hi, Warren and Charlie. My name is Tom Ringe. I'm from Wayne, Pennsylvania. It's great to be back here after 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
In this year's letter, you talked about insurance float, the evolution of float, the per share float, the effect on repurchase to increase the per share float. And in regard to the repurchase, I would say thank you as your partner for your careful repurchase as well as careful issuance of our shares. My question is about your expectation for the likelihood that float will be stable and the cost will be zero or close to that over time with adverse years from time to time. What about Berkshire's insurance businesses give you the confidence to make that statement when your competitors are trying to do the same thing but haven't been able to come close to achieving Berkshire's record in cost and growth of float? Thank you.
Yeah, well, they really aren't trying to do the same thing, which is kind of interesting. The answer to your question is we wouldn't be in the business unless it was my judgment that the likelihood, the weighted probabilities are higher that the float will be useful to us rather than costly to us. And nobody will know the answer to that for a very long time. So far, so good. But it is a judgment, and absolutely I could be wrong about it. But you know, I think both Charlie and I would say that we think the odds are that it's a winning bet, and the odds are pretty good, and that we're quite well positioned to do it if anybody does it. But, you know, did we know 9/11 was coming? Or, you know, I mean, it is not a sure thing.
Just think of what the potential is, though, when you're reviewing it. If we could buy common stocks we were virtually sure would give us 8% after taxes with our whole float, that would be a hell of a lot of money.
Well,
How
it'd be
many
11
people-
billion. I can tell you what it'd be, but
And,
11 or 12 billion
yes, it's an enormous amount of money.
annually.
Yes, and the float has been growing. So relax. We're glad to have the float.
But Charlie stuck in a couple of ifs there. If we could earn it, and if we could, the answer is, that it's our job, and we think we can do it as well as anybody, or we wouldn't be doing it. But it's our job to figure out what businesses we want to be in, and when they don't make sense, reluctantly, occasionally, to give up on them, like the textile business. But those are the hard decisions, and insurance. We didn't have the faintest idea back in 1967 when Jack Ringwald stopped by the office at he stopped by at about 11:45, and Charlie Hyder set him up. And Jack, about once a year, he'd get mad at the regulators. He just didn't like being regulated. And he'd say to himself, I'm going to sell this damn thing. And Charlie caught him one day, and he said, Jack is in the heat. I said, bring him around. So he came up, and 11:45, and Jack said he wanted to get rid of this damn business. The regulators were driving him nuts or something. And I said, fine, I'll buy it. And I said, what price do you want? And he said, I think $50 a share then. I said, fine, we've done it. We don't need an audit. We don't need anything. And then Jack started, and he says, immediately, he really changed his mind, but he was too honorable to back out. So he said, I suppose you'll want me to sell you the agencies. And I said, no. And of course, if I'd said yes, and then he said, then we can't do it. So I just said, no, yeah, keep them, Jack. And he said, I suppose you'll want me to do this. I said, no, I won't want you to do that. He was hoping I would just give him an out. But after doing that for 15 or 20 minutes, he saw that I was going to agree to everything he said, and he said he'd sell it to me at 50, so he followed through. And that was that. And, it was pure luck. And
But
Jack,
Gord, we really like our float, don't we?
pardon me?
We really like our float.
Oh, yeah.
We're not
No,
worried. We love it.
No, we made the most of it, but we didn't make the most of it till Ajit came along. And, who knew that the guy was going to walk into my office in 1986 and I would decide that he was the guy to make this damn thing work that I hadn't been able to make work the way I wanted it to. And who knew that Geico would come along later, and who knew it? There's just all kinds of things. The one thing you have to do is be prepared. When opportunity comes, you really do have to just move. And fortunately, I operate in an environment, and I wouldn't operate in any other environment. I get out of there. But I operate in an environment where I can do it. And it'd be crazy of the board to say, we want to set up a committee to review every acquisition and all that. And I would say that's fine, but you can work with somebody else, because I just don't like to go through all that stuff. I've got other things to do the rest of my life. There's so much luck, but there is that you do have to be mentally prepared and to do something when it makes sense, and do it big time and do it instantly. And then you got to be sure you've got the resources to do it.
The relative absence of bureaucracy at Berkshire
Unbelievable.
has made the company a lot of extra money for a very, very long time.
And it's made my life happier.
And yes, but that's ideal.
But in the end, we are extraordinarily well positioned to do exactly what we want to do with float, while at the same time never putting ourselves in the position, never coming close to making a promise we can't keep. We had two small insurance subsidiaries well before Ajit. Two companies I bought. One I really didn't know that much about. The other one, I did it all by myself. And they were disasters. And left alone, which they could have been, they'd have gone bankrupt. And we just didn't want to do it. So, we could pay the liabilities, and if the parent company got involved, or we put it in another insurance company or something, and we did it. I mean, it's Berkshire. In a crazy way, I look at Berkshire as a painting, and it's unlimited in size. It's got an ever-expanding canvas, and I get to paint what I want. And if somebody wants to paint something else, then I'll go someplace, and I'll get a smaller little thing, and I'll paint away. And I actually, I'm no good. I don't know anything about paintings. Take me to an art museum, and all I really want to know is where the men's room is. But I'm just not interested. And other people look at paintings, and they see something, and then they see something additionally later on. And I mean, they really have a different sort of perception ability in relation to that. And to me, Berkshire's a painting, and I get to paint. And the object, obviously, I want my partners to come out well in it, but the real thing I like is the painting. And as long as it's in my head, and I see different things in it as I go along, and it's the closest thing I can come to enjoying myself every minute of the day. and it's not, I don't prescribe it for other people. And occasionally not so occasionally, but I see things in the painting, I think, well, I should have done that differently, and I go back and paint it over, and it's satisfying. And who knows why human beings react in that manner, but I do know what makes me happy and what doesn't make me happy. I found what makes me happy, so why in the world would I change it? So that's a short answer to a question that I can't remember what it was. Okay. Becky.
This question comes from Andrew Kiesau from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He says, last year, Warren mentioned that inflation had noticeably impacted the prices that Berkshire's businesses were paying and charging. Given those inflationary trends have continued and in some cases accelerated since last year's meeting, could you comment on how this particular inflationary period ranks among previous such periods in the United States, like the 1970s and 1980s? And what can American businesses and citizens do to reduce the negative impacts that inflation brings about?
Well, we've sort of attacked what you do yourself. And you develop skills that people are willing to pay for in the future, regardless of what the unit of exchange is. But in terms of inflation in our own businesses, it's extraordinary how much we've seen. I think you interviewed Herb Blumpkin at the Furniture Mart, and for 2 years, the prices have just kept coming in higher for these things, and we sell them for higher prices, and people have more money than they've had before, and they like to buy. And there's certain things they can't buy. It's like during World War II, you had a lot of money created, and people couldn't buy cars, and they couldn't buy refrigerators, and they couldn't even buy as much sugar or coffee or things as they wanted. They had little stamps and gasoline and all kinds of things. Well, eventually, if you get a lot of money in people's hands and you don't have very many goods, prices go up. Now, you can do all kinds of things to try and talk it down. And of course, inflation is never the same. Nothing in economics is the same the second time after it happens than the first, because the first affects people's attitudes in the second, and their attitudes always influence the activity itself. I mean, it is an interesting phenomenon. people write a textbook and they write it based on the last experience, and people read the textbook so they behave differently next time, and then they wonder why they're getting a different result than they got the time before. So anyway, we have sent out lots and lots and lots. When I say we, I mean the United States government. The government has sent out lots of money to people. And at some point, the money can't be worth as much as it was when there was less money out. Here's an interesting figure that I think probably will astound you. Sounds me anyway. The Federal Reserve every Thursday puts out a balance sheet. The Federal Reserve and Treasury, they're complicated institutions, but they do put out this kind of consolidated statement of all the various Federal Reserve banks, all these things that have entered into legislation over the years. But there's a balance sheet. And 15 years ago, roughly, if you look, the Federal Reserve issues those notes I talked about a while back. And that's the one, here's the current one. And they print these pieces of paper. And they, one way or another, they got it in the hands of people. Well, the interesting thing is, people said cash is dead and all that sort of thing, cashless society. Well, there were 800 billion, go back 10 or 15 years, but there was about 800 billion of currency in circulation. And if you look at last Thursday's report, you'll see there's something like now $2.2 trillion of currency in circulation, 2.2 trillion. Now there's about, there's 330 million people in the United States. Let's look at it that way. And with 330 million people, and you have almost 2.3 trillion of currency in circulation, that's $7,000 per person. Every man, woman, and child, in theory, has $7,000 worth of currency. Well, that isn't right, but you do know that the Federal Reserve's bookkeeping is essentially right. They've got that much that's out there. I don't know where it is. I mean, I don't know whether it's in Russia. I don't know whether it's in South America. I don't know where. I don't know whether Charlie's got it all. I mean, it's a staggering sum. Cash is dead, and yet we, on average, have $7,000 for every person in the United States. Now, while you're absorbing that, think for a moment what would happen if the U.S. government said, well, they work it out in private, and they decide that they're going to send Federal Reserve, and I'm not going to blame the Federal Reserve for this. Somebody back in Washington decides they're going to send out $1 million to every household in the United States. And there are 130 million households in the United States or something like that, and they're going to mail you $1 million in cash. And there were a couple of provisions attached to it. One is, if you talked about it in the next 30 days, the money disappeared. So it was like in one of those old TV shows or something, and poof, disappears. And after 30 days, you could spend it. Well, all of a sudden, the household wealth of the United States, Federal Reserve puts out an estimate, is 130 trillion or something like that. So basically, you've doubled the household wealth. And all you've done is mail out people. But you don't tell them you're doing it with everybody. You just say they won the lottery or whatever it may be. And now you've got an amount equal to household wealth. On average, people have doubled it. They've got this extra 30 trillion of wealth, and in a month they can spend it. Well, what's going to happen? Well, prices are going to go up, but are they going to go up immediately? Well, you don't know the other guy got it. You just know you've got it, so you don't really feel like you got to rush out and buy things. But as soon as word gets around, well, we've mailed out. If you look at the amount we've distributed, the federal government, I'm just talking about the distribution of resources. We're talking numbers like that, and it affects prices. It has to affect prices. If you had 10 times as much, if you went home and you found out you had 10 times the net worth you had yesterday, but everybody else did the same thing, it doesn't increase the amount of bread in the economy or the number of cars. It just means that the price, the value of this is going to go down, and its purchasing power, you can't buy more than exists. So it's a very strange period where we had lots of money sent out to people, one way or another we're getting it, that they didn't find as many things to buy as before, and we had supply chain disruption. We have all these things happen. But the end of it is they go out to the Nebraska Furniture Mart and they start buying things. And they do it with our other companies. And they do it in very peculiar ways. And now they're buying, one thing, jewelry stores were, generally speaking, not a very good business. And 2 years ago, every landlord that had a jewelry store or multiple jewelry stores in their mall, was wondering how they were going to get their rent. And now every jewelry store virtually is doing incredibly better than they ever dreamt, with way less inventory, because people are just come in and buy. And they don't wait for sales. When they walk in the store, they're going to walk out and they're going to have bought something, and they pay for it. They got the money. So we are seeing an unleashing of the fact that we've just mailed a lot of money to people, one way or another. It's very indirect. It all gets complicated when you talk about a big system, but this is what's happened. And I will guarantee you that if we mail out $1 million to every household in the United States tonight, and you don't know that it's happened, you don't really expect much to happen in behavior tomorrow, but somehow, at some point, and then if you start doing it every month, we'll say, and people really know you're doing it, then they start anticipating it and buying ahead of time and forward. There's a million things that happen in economics. But the answer is, we've had a lot of inflation, and it was almost impossible not to have if you're going to mail out the kind of money we've mailed out. And it's probably a good thing we did it. In fact, I think there was one point when the